common archetype in anime and manga is the coward character. It speaks for itself, but popular examples are Zenitsu from Demon Slayer, Stark from Frieren, and Usopp from One Piece. These characters are debated over which of them does the archetype justice, with the fan favorite being those who overcome their faults and prevail in the end due to hard work and development. One common thread connecting the widely liked characters and what we'll be discussing today is the causation and effect of their cowardice. I've come to find that many of the characters who I do love of this archetype, such as Stark, are that their traits do not hijack and run the plot of the story. Many times, again and again, Stark has a reason to be the way he is and does not overpower what is supposed to be happening, compared to Zenitsu, whose only redeeming quality is the lazy writing put into his gimmick. Let's get into the cause and effect blueprint. There's two characters I want to explore in this video: Madoka from Madoka Magica and Snow White from Magical Girl Raising Project. These two come from Magical Girl anime and tightly follow the same sort of tonal shift, where a genre that is supposed to be lighthearted and comical turns into a grim and serious plot line surrounded by grievances. You could say that Magical Girl Raising Project was inspired by Madoka Magica, but it is nowhere near the genius that is Madoka. The writing from both of these shows share similar themes, but the execution of these are so far apart. We'll look at how Madoka's cowardice is affected by her story, and how Snow White's cowardice is the cause of everything wrong with the show. We'll look at the sour fruit out of this bunch first. Magical Girl Raising Project is a death game between different magical girls who utilize different powers to get what they want. Some are more prone to being maniacal, striking down all of their opponents in sight and not giving any time for their opposition to launch a counterattack. Others, like Snow White, refrain from fighting and try to resolve this death game through diplomacy and calmer means. In terms of character development, two very important things about a character's story is the likability of the person and the progression they make throughout their several arcs. Snow White has already stated that her motivation in all of this is to prevent as many deaths as possible while staying a pacifist. It is something that displays her values clearly as someone who does not condone violence. The problem that arises with the story is that these values are the cause for what happens in the story rather than her values being affected by the plot. She is oftentimes a hindrance to the people around her, causing them to get hurt while she gets away scot-free while never changing her views. I have to say that stubbornness can be a good quality trait if only they didn't flip that on its head in the last 5 minutes of the show. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but as the events of the story started to unfold and the intensity drastically skyrocketed, Snow White was stubborn to a fault. It wasn't a fault that we got to see her work on and progress through the story. As she was making negative progress towards changing for the greater good, the plot was still focusing around her inability to make a competent decision. As she made no progress, her likability became worse and worse as close friends of hers were killed all around her. While it is good to have morals and values, it is also good writing to incorporate overcoming obstacles, realizing that your values will result in nothing but negative things in these circumstances. It's a normal human thing to change according to the situation. The technique used in the story's writing was flawed, with the plot exploring how Snow White's qualities affect the events around her rather than showing how Snow White is affected by the tragedy surrounding her. They eventually switched to the latter, but far too soon when there is no development to be shown. The values you tried so hard to cling on to immediately going out the window is selfish and betraying to the viewers who did believe in the character and in the author. Snow White is the cause of everything bad with the story. She caused the plot to unfold the way it did, and as it was closely following her, we didn't get enough involvement with others to get attached to them and feel empathy towards them and sadness when they passed on. There is a line you must draw between accurately developing a character and progressing the plot line in the direction you want. If you force one or the other, then the result is lackluster and is missing the punch such a reveal would usually have. There could have been salvation for this fallout if the anime decided to develop Snow White any bit more to showcase how this series of tragic events leads her to a life that will achieve all of her new goals, but all we get is a scene of the last two remaining characters training against each other, alluding to the fact that she does change for the greater good, but not enough for us to grab onto concretely and believe it genuinely. This is the first example of writing when it comes to coward characters. In Snow White's case, her cowardice runs the story and causes it to run amok among different characters and motivations that don't make sense with one another. Even if they are opposing, they don't clash as expected, and it's like forcing jigsaw pieces into place. In the opposite direction, you have a story like Madoka. It is a story of deceit where the premise of magical girls saving the world is a ruse to lure in believers to their ultimate demise. The characters within the plot realize this too late, but have to push forward on the journey where they hopefully won't perish to the same fate as everyone else. Speaking from a narrative standpoint, the starts of both these stories are far from each other, with Madoka being my personal favorite for its deeper complexity, but the tonal shifts and characterization of the protagonist are the exact same. Madoka is a girl who is roped into the magical girl scene, but refrains from making a contract throughout the whole story because of circumstances that befall her friends and that her friends impose onto her. From being vehemently warned to being shielded from harm multiple times, she takes a backseat and is a realistic depiction of a cowardly character. She is someone who doesn't have the power to do many things, but struggles as much as she can to change the things that she can alter. I can't talk too much about the intricacies of Madoka's plot since it wouldn't be good good on my conscience, but the plot has an effect on Madoka's cowardice. Madoka plays a central part in the plot, but this doesn't mean she maniacally controls the direction it goes in. On the contrary, the events that occur have a great effect on how Madoka develops as a person. Her cowardice becomes an avenue for her to explore herself. She doesn't rush into the conflicts with a hazy mind and is able to think about one of the most important things as a character, which is her motivation to join the fight at hand. As you go through the story, she establishes her motivation, and it is a climactic reveal towards the end of the show. Madoka's likability is already off the charts with how kind she is to her friends and strangers in trouble. Even without powers, she does her best to do what she is capable of. She intends to sacrifice herself at times, knowing that there is very little chance of her coming out of it safe. These two important traits work hand in hand to progress Madoka's characterization, and overall, she is fit to be an exemplary character in terms of writing. All this works hand in hand with the fact that the plot of Madoka has a very hands-on approach with how Madoka grows as a person. Even as you inch closer to the ending, she grows more confident. She is more sure of herself. As times get scarier, she grows wary, but not to the point of inaction. She proves herself throughout the show, and it makes sense how she goes about the resolution. I wish I could talk more about the ending, but if you want that, I recommend checking out my Patreon. I'll be uploading an unedited video of me talking about Madoka and its ending with spoilers, so if you want my genuine thoughts on Madoka as a story, check out my Patreon. There's a free trial available, so if you just want a peek behind everything, then it's out there for you. This cause and effect blueprint is the key to writing a good story. Much like the story of Stark in Frieren, he grows from the events happening in the plot. When he is fighting the demons in Graf Granite's domain, he uses his past as a lesson to overcome the present and prevail as a new person altogether. It's characters like these that shine the most when talking about cowards because the development makes sense and it's given time to breathe. The difference between Madoka and Snow White matters because if you want a story that is plagued by a character's faults and mistakes, then you make a Magical Girl Raising Project. But if you want a story that is troubled by faults and mistakes, but is uplifted by the rebound of a character's development and brings a hopeful tone to the resolution, then you make Madoka.